Yes, you like the idea of orphans getting a new home,
Yeah.
but this is
But was it optional or did they have to get on the train?
that's the thing. Sometimes they just rounded kids up in the streets. They didn't even really check if they had parents.
Through the halls of memories, brushstrokes of history, capturing humanity. Stories left untold, whispers of the past, secrets they withhold. Yeah, yeah. The condition
So let's start with the first one on the list here, and that is the
The
Custer County Museum.
Yeah, so Nebraska early on, a lot of the like Nebraska museums all really start off as historical societies, and a lot of these kicked off. Some of the earliest museums that we're going to be looking at on these earliest historical societies were started all the way back in the 1930s, which is really early. Majority of the different historical societies throughout the state were all founded kind of after the centennial. So about 1970s. And it was just, I feel like a lot of people at the time like had that realization, like, oh my gosh, grandma has been, passed away now for 20 years, and we have a lot of her older stuff. And she was a she, started and worked in the county, and so it just kind of snowballs from there. A lot of people with the like idea kind of pool their resources together. And so I think a lot of, at least from what my research has shown, a lot of the museums started around that time. And so that's where you're going to see a lot of county historical societies or county museums in this list, because they each kind of broke off and they did their same thing around the same time.
Yeah, and I'm guessing Solomon Butcher was a well-known photographer.
Yeah, so Custer County Museum, they've got a little bit of they have a really great research library for genealogy for in and around the area, but they also have like a couple of really cool snapshots of different businesses and stuff like that was in Broken Bow or around in throughout the county. But Solomon Butcher was he was a very prolific photographer early on in the county's history, and he didn't just stay there. He wandered all the way through. He has some photos of really cool early downtown Kearney, Nebraska, really early, like some of these well-known towns. And he had a very high definition camera, and so they've got a gallery of Solomon Butcher original photographs, which are pretty rare. So it's a really cool stop.
Yeah. Let me scratch on the screen here. So this is one of his photographs. And
Mhm.
I see what you're saying. He must have had a nice camera because photos from 1889, I didn't think would be that clear.
Yeah, and I just find like he has a really good eye for like his shots. They have really early, like there is this early sod house. Sod houses have a really brief moment within the state history because anybody that built one really wanted to move out of one. And so
Why? Were they not structurally sound?
well, they were made out of sod, but what people hated about that, it was nice because it was an insulating material.
Yeah.
It was a protective material, and it kept warm in the winters. It would trap that heat, and it would stay cool, in the summers because again, it would be, almost subterranean. But they were prone to flooding. They were prone to snakes. A lot of the diaries that I've read into, they have a lot of bull snakes throughout these, sod houses, and so pretty much anybody that had one, they wanted to go into a traditional, what we would consider a wooden constructed farmhouse. But yeah, he has really early snapshots of the foundings and the really early people of different counties in that area.
Yeah, I think here's a great photograph. Mhm.
Yeah,
We have
that
someone
one.
else with a cow on
Yeah,
top.
yes. So the other funny part about this, you can see they have a lot of stuff. Whenever he would go around and take different photos, the culture at the time, They wanted to project their wealth. They wanted to show like, hey, I've got a steer, I've got a horse, I've got all of these wonderful things, and they'd take like their personal stove from inside of the
And they
sadi
put
and
it
put it,
outside.
prop it out, just because they wanted to project, their wealth or what they had
Yeah.
available at the time. So is really cool, and he has a lot of different sod house photos, which again is a very brief time in history, especially like Nebraska history. So. And photos speak a thousand words, so I definitely think that's worth a stop to go in and look at that gallery.
And let me just share my screen. So you had mentioned that there's a research center here, obviously. So home
Hmm.
says cemetery, obituaries, marriages. That
Yep.
seems rather complete. That's amazing that they would have records of those things from way back
Hmm.
in the day, from 1919. Impressive.
Yeah, it's kind of a two-hand side. Early on, a lot of these historical societies, they really liked specifically certain types of artifacts that were in the area. And so that was almost one hand of it is just collecting stuff. And
Hmm.
then on the other side, genealogy began to be very popular. Is like, oh, well, grandma and grandpa, how did they end up in this county? Like, where did
Yeah.
they come from? And so that led to an entire research, teams that start up in genealogies and then you always work your way backwards when it comes to genealogy. So 9 times out of 10, if they were born in another country, you might not have a birth record, but
Yeah.
they definitely died in the county. So at least you have an obituary
You
to
got
start
that.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you do obituaries and you kind of work backwards from there.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring that up. Actually, I haven't done it yet. It's literally downstairs. I'm doing it today or tomorrow. It's one of those ancestry DNA things that you
Oh,
like
yeah.
didn't have you done that?
I haven't. I'm a
No.
little skeptical with like private companies having my DNA, but
Yeah. Yeah, it seems fun. All right. Anything else we should talk about here? Any?
One of the director there at the Custer County Museum, she's on the Nebraska Museum Association board. Really lovely gal, and she's been doing a really great job over there. And Broken Bow has a lot of other really neat stuff. They've got a couple nice restaurants, and they have a brewery there. That's really it's in Broken Bow, and it's really definitely worth a stop. Especially their Oktoberfest is amazing. It's so
Yeah,
fun.
that's
So
cool.
definitely worth a stop.
All right, let's take a look at the next one. Let me share my screen with you. Here we have the Golden Spike Tower.
Yeah, so this one is a
Perfect.
little bit different. They really focus. This is over in North Platte, Nebraska, and it's a mixture of a museum, but it's also a learning center about railroad infrastructure throughout the United States. And North Platte has one of the largest, if not the largest, rail yard, the Bailey Yard. And funnily enough, on their website, they actually have a live camera,
Oh,
always on,
really?
24/7.
Where is that? Where can I
Um,
see that?
they have on the top the drop downs, the
Yeah.
Explore the Town, and then next to that is Bailey Yard, and you can
Yes.
click, and it
Oh,
has a
that's
live camera,
all right.
just looking at the different,
Let's
stuff that are coming in and out.
let's do
Um,
it. Let's do it. Let's see what's happening.
I'm
Uh,
guessing not a whole lot, um,
but
but
it's impressive. It looks really
yeah.
big. Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, they've got a live camera up and they are just a really cool addition to North Platte there. I've had family members that stop by and they say that that's definitely worth a stop on the trip because they, like I said, they have kind of a railroad specific museum built
Yeah.
into this. I think it's a 5 or 6 story tall tower that you can
Yeah, I was gonna
oversee.
say that's a tower on the homepage. It's white.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. 8 floors.
Here's just a question about webcams in general on websites. Do you
Mhm.
know the hardware that's used and the software that's
I
needed
do
to?
not.
No, okay.
It
'Cause
might be baked into their security system. Like
yeah,
over at the museum that I manage, Nebraska Prairie Museum, we've got a camera system, and I can always pop in and out live. So they might have a similar-ish kind of camera system.
yeah,
I'm
that's
not
cool.
too sure.
Yeah. Let's take a look at I don't know what this is. We have the Hall of Fame. It's some of the most influential and important people, not only of Bailey Yard in Union Pacific, but of North Platte as well. All right. So
Yeah, and North Platte has a couple of other really well-known museums. They have a Buffalo Bill Cody Museum. Everybody
okay.
I think knows Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, yeah.
What his live show performances and that had a really long stint in North Platte.
Okay.
And so you'd have all of these, like I would like to say even like Chicago and New York elites that would take the train over to North Platte and they would go specifically to Buffalo Bills shows. And so they have a museum dedicated to that. And then they've got a couple of other, I think they've got a museum focused on, I want to say, don't they have one that's on? Yeah, so the Buffalo Bill, Cody Ranch, Railroad Trains Museum, um, and then they've got a really cool Veterans Memorial that's in North Platte that I've been to. And so yeah, that's the Golden Spike though is really neat because you just get such a bird's eye view. And being in Nebraska, it's somewhat flat,
Oh
especially in
yeah.
that area, so you can see for quite a while, quite a ways.
Yeah, let's take a look at these pictures. So yeah, that's that tower. But I thought this was interesting. So I'm assuming these are all where the rail cars come in.
Yep. Yeah, it's a pretty expansive, piece of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of rail passes through Nebraska. And my town I was born and grew up in is Kearney, Nebraska, and we always would say it's a 7 minute train because there's a train going either way every
Wow.
7 minutes. And
Yeah.
so it's a very busy Union Pacific Railroad that goes north of the Platte River just has a lot of trains going back and forth.
Let's see. Anything else we should talk about? The Golden Spike Tower?
No, I would just say plan your visit, especially if you're going west to east. North Platte is one of the more western side. It's right before I think they're right on the edge of the Sand Hills. And so as you're going west to east, that would be definitely a good stop. It's right along I-80, so it's not no more than a 5 minute, 10 minute, detour away from uh, I-80.
Let's take a look at what's next. The Hastings Museum, Natural and Cultural History.
Yeah, Hastings Museum has a really interesting history of even just the museum itself. It was founded by a somewhat well-to-do man in the 1930s. No, 1920s, 1930s is Al Brookings. And this is a bit of trivia. He's actually buried in the basement of the museum.
Wow.
And so he has they over at the Hastings Museum they've got I would say three major things. First, it's a really well put together I would say a modern museum. They've got their exhibits and their interpretation is really well done. And But they've got a huge floor full of taxidermy. So they have a whole bunch of different animals, almost like a natural history museum. And then from there, they've got their upper and lower levels that have I would say, a more traditional history museum. I always went there as a kid, growing up, and that was always it blew my mind. So they also have a ton of weaponry. I think that was another part of, guns and taxidermy. I'm thinking Brookings was really into because they have a lot of really early rare World War I all the way through Korea, Vietnam, and they've got some really cool exhibits that were like they're shelving in a way that's built in with like plexiglass, and they're kind of in the exhibits of those firearms are like built into these shells. It's really cool. So if you're a World War nut guy, kind of like me, you might find that interesting. But in the other side of it is they have a lot of programming throughout for like kids and families, but they also have a theater. And that theater, they play modern movies, but they also play different documentaries and history films and stuff like that. And I think they always have a movie going in, and their social media account, they usually have a pretty up to date, what they're showing. Right now, it's the If movie
Oh yeah.
with Ryan
Hey.
Ryan Reynolds and
Yeah.
that. And so they always have new movies coming in,
Yeah, it
and
looks
it's
like
a
they
lot
have
of
a
really cool programming.
planetarium as well. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. I was as a kid, it always blew my mind whenever like we would go there as a school trip.
Yeah.
And so it's cool. And Hastings is a larger town for in central Nebraska. They've got a real couple of, they also have a brewery there. They've got a couple of really cool restaurants. I will shout out Odyssey. It's a really nice, I would say higher scale or like higher scale dining experience. That's
Yeah.
really classy. And so yeah, you can make almost a day trip going to Hastings. Honestly, you can make a day trip of any of the places that we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely recommend a trip over to Hastings. It's about 45-minute drive south on highway or Interstate 80.
Yeah. That's cool. I also see that they have this, a pedal trolley tour.
Yeah, that I heard was been very popular. I had one of our volunteers over at the museum that I manage and work at. They had went on that trolley tour, and they said it was so insightful because they have a lot of really cool historic buildings throughout Hastings.
Okay.
And they in the trolley tour went around there as the low area historian would talk about the different places.
Yeah.
So they said that was really, really fun.
Yeah,
So.
that's really smart. And it's I don't know how much those vehicles cost, but it seems like a great way if you are so like a historical society with locations, spread out a little bit. That's a great way to do it. I love that idea.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and those trolleys I know are really popular, like downtown Lincoln and that, and it because it kind of skirts the drinking and driving laws. So if people like to
Yeah.
have a beverage or two, they can sit on this trolley and go through downtowns. I don't know if their trolley down in Hastings does or not, but they've got some really fun programming. They always have some unique ones. They've got more like some, I would say, more adult oriented content when it's like they do a special Valentine's history. It's kind of more for like couples to get out, have a couple glasses of wine and talk like more let's just say non-kid friendly history
Yeah.
that exists out there, and it's some of it's really fun and engaging history. So
Yeah.
they're very creative with their programming out that way.
No, that sounds great. I mean, because nobody wants to be bored.
No,
But yeah.
no.
And then let's take a look at this. This is on their exhibits page.
Hmm.
It says, I am a man, civil rights movement, and then ammunition depot.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, the ammunition depot, and then the other really cool thing that a lot of people saw, if you scroll down just that little bit more,
yeah.
is Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid was invented in Hastings, Nebraska. So
Really?
if any, that's a good trivia question to any of the
Wow.
listeners, is if where was Kool-Aid invented? And so they've got a really big exhibit, and Kool-Aid Days is a big festival that they have every year.
Wow.
And they've got every different flavor of Kool-Aid that's ever existed, and they've got a lot of really kind of like they've got a whole exhibit in the museum dedicated to the history of Kool-Aid, which is kind of fun.
Who would have known? That's great. All right, let's take a look at what's next. And that is the Robert Henry Museum and Art Gallery.
Yeah, so Robert Henry was a area artist, and they have their main art gallery there, and this is in Cozad, Nebraska. And along with that, they also have I think it's called the Meridian Museum, which is more of a, I would say, a historical, like more of like a traditional history museum that you'd find in the area. And I just linked over for the Robert Henry Museum because he's got a lot. They have a lot more of his artwork that he had done. And I think it's a very extensive art gallery. And their local area curator, he's a really interesting guy, absolutely knows any and everything about Robert Henry. And so really cool gallery. And it talks about Robert Henry's life as he's lived, kind of a historic tour of him growing up and finding his fame with the different art pieces that he had done.
Yeah, and I clicked on about, and it looks like he was born in 1865. It's a long time ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
All right.
And Yeah, so yeah, that would be definitely one if you're an art buff, definitely would be worth a stop. They've got a lot of really cool pieces. I think his art style is very approachable. And I think that it's good for the, whole family kind of an event. And like I said, they've got a traditional history museum built into the art. So it kind of links
Yeah,
together the artist and his art kind of together, which I think is a really cool narrative.
yeah, that's very cool. Let's take a look at some of his art. So this is about the museum and gallery. So these are all his paintings, I'm assuming.
Yes, yep.
Hmm.
And I've only been there once, and I think they've added quite a bit to their exhibit space and a lot more of his pieces. When I was there, they had just built into one of their first wings, and now they have. I think they're expecting another major renovation to the art gallery and exhibit space. So they're growing both their collection and their footprint, which is really cool for the town of Cozad, I think.
Yeah, very cool. And I see what you're saying, like the museum building, like,
Hmm.
it's like a house. Looks like first floor of the museum and old furniture. I'm assuming these were outfits worn by the family, by Teresa, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a connection there. The town Cozad was named after some of the early founders of the town, and I think yeah, Robert Henry is I think his mother was a Cozad or something like that. So he's got a direct connection to the town. And one way or the other, check out their website. Their website has a lot of cool information that I would recommend having a read through
Good
on your way to
advice.
go visit.
When your exhibits are outdoors and there is no electricity and no wall labels, how can you help guests explore those exhibits? The 42 Kites premium devices work great in sun-drenched meadows, rain-soaked trails, and snow-covered landscapes. They work anywhere you want them to. Only at 42kites.com.
This is the Plainsman Museum. Dark
Yeah,
Candy Day.
yeah,
Hmm.
the Plainsman is really cool. Again, another I would say quintessential Midwest Nebraska history museum. They're one of the earlier ones. Like I said, they started in the 1930s,
Oh,
and they started out as like a house museum, and then had built a full exhibit area kind of around that 1970s. And so that still exists into today. And what I really love is the architecture of the building. They really, I would say, built the exhibits in that to fit within a large kind of a foyer. That's it's really big. They've got some really beautiful mosaics throughout the floors, and then the walls just are decorated with these really cool paintings. And so I definitely recommend a visit. They're over in Aurora, Nebraska, I believe, and they uh, there is not too far. I think Aurora is a 45-minute drive north on I-80. And they also do, of course, I would say this is another example of a historical society museum. So they have a lot of genealogy research, local county research. They also have a thing called the History Detectives, which is a cool program that they do. And it's just really funny is that this is a real you bring in kids ages up to 12, and they're giving a mystery to solve that is built in with their exhibits. And so it's a really fun interactive that they can do with some of the if you have some kids that are visiting.
yeah, that's a great idea. Let's take a look at the image galleries. Which one of these four do you think we should click on and take a look at?
The very first one gives a good idea of their main
Okay,
building.
let's see.
They've got another kind of space that's next to it, but it really, I think they also have like a rotating, they have a big space that they can have rotating exhibitions in.
Yeah,
And so I think that each time you visit, there's going to be something different, according to what exhibitions that they have.
Yeah.
But like I said, a lot of like what I would say is a kind of a very typical historical society museum.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks great. Let me close out of this. Yeah, I see History Detect. So it must be popular, the History Detective, because it's on the main navigation on their
Hmm.
website. Yeah, that's a great idea. Case file. Test your observation skills, follow the clues, and become a Plainsman Museum history detective. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next one. The Clayton Museum of Ancient History.
Yeah, so this is another of the twofers. This is over in York, Nebraska. This is a fun, unique museum. You really don't they This is one that I don't think you would think of as a museum that would be here in Nebraska. But the Clayton Museum of Ancient History is exactly what it sounds like. They cover Roman and kind of early Roman ancient history. And they have artifacts from the fall of Rome, from a lot of different manuscripts and things like that from throughout like the Roman Empire, funnily enough. And this
Yeah.
is in York, Nebraska.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. You wouldn't think something like that would be in Nebraska. So this is their permanent exhibits, like you were saying, ancient Mesopotamia, Rome, you were saying.
hmm Yeah,
I
I
just,
think they focus on Egypt, Greek, Roman kind of histories, and so it's pretty unique. One that they have over this current summer season is an ancient Greek exhibit. This ancient Greek exhibit kind of focuses on some of the different pottery and masonry and architecture that was found throughout the Greek Empire, which is, I think, a really cool idea. And so they're all throughout. They've got a lot of events scheduled throughout their year. So again, I'd recommend checking out their website if you're going to be paying a visit. Maybe they
yeah.
might have a program going on when you go to stop. And the other York Museum is the Anna Burmis Palmer Museum. They're both in York. One is in downtown, and then the Clayton Ancient History Museum is more out east of town. And so those two places are pretty unique. Anna Burmis Palmer Museum is what I would describe again as a Midwest museum. They've got
This is
right
America
now.
at War exhibit.
Yep, so that's their current exhibit is focusing on the history of the area of veterans, but also just in general Nebraska's role, York, Nebraska, and that's role in the different wars. And so they've got a really pretty large exhibit of photos of artifacts of military equipment and things like that throughout the museum. And their main gallery in that is always changing. So that's their current exhibit that they're flushing out, and they have had in the past other exhibits that feature art or feature different kind of notable, topics.
Yeah. Yeah, like you were just saying, talks about like the war. I'm seeing this. Looks like they have a lot of memorabilia, helmets and outfits. And I'm assuming highlighting local people, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. I had no idea the impact that Nebraska played in that. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was, I mean, it was national, but Nebraska felt it had a lot more unique roles. Something we'll be talking about later at the museum that I work at, so I won't give too many spoilers for then. But like when we were looking at the Hastings Museum, they had a naval depot, which was the naval artillery and different munitions. They were like the number one place in the nation that produced all of these munitions and stuff like that. So
Oh,
and then out east in Lincoln, they also had a bunch of different munitions plants. And like I said, I'll give don't want to give too many hints at it, but one of the museum that I work at, we have a big history on the German captured POWs.
Oh
That
wow.
was another big element for in Nebraska. So everything's unique to these different towns and the way
Yeah.
that they related to the different war efforts. And so it's a really cool kind of inclusion to have those different museums in the town of York is awesome. It's another kind of unique Midwest town. They've got a couple of good restaurants and places to stop at there as well.
So let's take a look at the next one on the list, which is the Nebraska
Yeah.
Prairie Museum. I've never been to
Yes.
Nebraska, but that is exactly what I think Nebraska looks like.
Yes. So this is the museum that I work at. So
Okay.
I'm a little biased of it. And we focus on South Central Nebraska history, specifically Phelps County. And so this is exactly what I was saying earlier too. It's a historical society that has evolved over the years to go into more of um, a museum that kind of focuses more on regional history. And so we focus on one of our big exhibits, like I was just talking about, is the Atlanta Prisoners of War Camp. So the German POWs were basically brought in from the kind of front lines in either Africa or Europe or wherever that were captured. And because England and France basically they were full capacity, they couldn't take in any more of the POWs. They shipped them on a boat that then shipped them on a train all the way over to central Nebraska. And there was actually, I think it's 16 states and there was 48 camps throughout 16 states. So it's a really kind of unique, I would say, um, underrepresented kind of history within the Midwest. And so we have a big exhibit featuring the POW camp as well as a an art gallery featuring Thomas Nagley's art. He was a German English interpreter, or he was a German English interpreter while he was at the camp. His parents in that migrated leaving Germany. They were both as Jewish descent, and so they were able to escape Germany, finding a new world, coming to the United States, and that was something that Thomas Nagley, learning, growing up speaking German, was able to be a translator. And so he found he was doing, as he was working at the camp, he was doing less and less interpreting. So it gave him more time to paint. And so he painted about half of the gallery then in the 1940s, and then a whole new collection in the 1990s when it was coming up to the 50th anniversary of World War II.
Wow. And I'm noticing on this banner on your homepage, I see a church and two houses. Are those part of the museum as well?
Yes, they are. So those are all brought into the space. They are kind of what I would say is a quintessential example of a Midwest church, a Midwest farmhouse, and a Midwest kind of schoolhouse. So they're good representations of those three. The church is a Scandinavian Lutheran church. The farmhouse was owned by the Andersons and was fairly well unmodified outside of adding electricity. And so you won't find a restroom inside of the house. There was
Oh.
no running gas or anything like that for cooktops. Everything was done fairly outside.
So
And
those structures were there first and then the museum opened?
nope, they were all moved in. So they
They were
literally
moved.
picked them up and transported them to the museum grounds.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy what if you've ever seen a house move. We had a home that was on a piece of land that was adjacent to the museum that the museum board had purchased, but we didn't really need the house, and so we partnered with our South Central Economic Development Group, and they paid to lift this, ranch style house up off of its foundation and transport it into town. It's a crazy thing that you think of a house as being so big and heavy and everything, and
Yeah.
they did a really great job at moving that. So,
I can't imagine
um,
the logistics involved in moving a house.
yeah, I've got a friend that works for the public power in the area, and he says it's fairly common because they have to go and jack up the power lines up higher so it can clear the roof.
Oh, wow. And then take a look at this. What am I looking at here? Is this like
Yep.
farm equipment? And I see a
Yep.
car in the corner.
Yep, so that is our Schrock Hall exhibit area. It kind of has focuses on the area agronomy, but we also have a couple of antique historic automobiles and some of the other kind of memorabilia. We have Phelps County is home to the Nebraska state soil. Apparently, that's a thing. Yeah, so the
Oh,
state of Nebraska soil, the
the
official
official
soil.
soil of the
Yes.
state. Okay.
It's Holdridge silt loam soil, and we've got that history of it, and then as well as we kind of home of the history of the Tri-County project. The Tri-County project was a series of dams that was constructed to put together irrigation canal systems throughout the Nebraska. So it had actually a profound effect on agronomy because before they were just dry land, and so their yields were a lot less, and it really was climate specific. And they put together a couple of levees and were able to fund the creation of these dams. And so, if you look up just a map of like the reservoir system of Nebraska, all of those reservoirs were all created because of the Tri County project, as well as I think three hydroelectric dams, hydroelectric generation plants and those so it generates electricity, it clean, hydroelectricity. It creates recreational spots with all the fishing, which when they first put these reservoirs in, recreation wasn't something on their mind. It's just fishing cabins. But now, they've got all these multi-million-dollar cabins that are going in at some of the Lake McConaughey, Lake Johnson Lake, Harlan Lake.
Take a look at, tell me, so this is, I guess, a post on your
Yeah.
website, the orphan train. What is the orphan train?
Yeah, so the orphan train system started up as a way to basically move some of these what was perceived at as abandoned children or poor children from the cities and transport them out west
Oh,
to basically start a new life as farm hands. It's kind of it's definitely, I would say, very mixed. Yes, you like the idea of orphans getting a new home,
yeah.
but this is
But was it optional or did they have to get on the train?
that's the thing. Sometimes they just rounded kids up in the streets. They didn't even
God.
really check if they had parents. Like,
Oh, that's terrible.
this is well before Child Protective Services. So, like,
I
you
guess.
the family that like they just uh drove out west and had the kids line up, and they would do like jumping jacks. They would check their teeth. They would make sure that they could work, and like I said, there was no follow-up. They don't know if the kid was abused afterwards. They didn't know whatever happened to them. You hope that the parents took care of them.
Yeah.
And the other time about it too is that it's written in that they are to be indentured until I think 20 years old is what the contract was. And that's indentured. That's not adopted. So they were
Right.
by contract have to be with that family and working with that family until they got old enough. And so yeah, it's very dubious. I'm sure there are positive stories and experiences from
Sure.
some of the orphans, but like I said, very probably dubious and very, I think, not the best. So I'm definitely glad, child protectives and our current systems for, orphaned kids is it has its flaws, but if you look at the history, it's for
It's
the
come a long
sake and the
way.
health of the children. I think it's a lot better
Yeah.
situation.
Well, all right. And yeah, I see you have an online store here.
Yeah. We
And
just came out with some new t-shirts and a art book. So we just had this published. It got in just a few weeks ago. Is Thomas Nagley's Time Out for War. This is an art book that he had done. You're welcome to order it, and we ship to any places, and just gives a sneak peek of his art with some interpretation done by Thomas Nagley himself.
wow. So you guys had these shirts designed? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So a local print shop here in Holders, Nebraska called Screen Machine. They came up with the design. They did the screen printing, and they, got it out to us for sale. And I think their designs are really unique.
Yeah, I like it. It looks like it's sort of a buffalo or something on the side.
Yeah, that's one I'm actually wearing now.
Yeah,
It's like got an asymmetric buffalo pattern that's on the side,
yeah.
that I think is kind of fun.
What happened in Plum Creek? It doesn't sound like a good thing.
Yeah, so you have to think early on in Nebraska, you had wagon trains going out west. This is, I think, what people, little like Oregon Trail, Little House on the Prairie. I think that's what most people kind of consider for Nebraska. And so you had the Mormon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, and the Oregon Trail that all met kind of at the middle there next to or to Kearney, Nebraska and Grand Island, Nebraska. And that was a very important juncture because that was your last stop for quite a ways. So that was your last chance to get provisions to make sure you're stocked up. And so as you had these different wagon trains going out west, they that was a last stop. So Fort Kearney was a what we would call a traditional military Midwest fort. They had, and then the United States government owned a mile by mile square around the fort grounds that they kind of managed.
Okay.
And so that was a really important stop. And what had happened is a group of Cheyenne attacked a wagon train that was heading out west, tried to frame that it was a Pawnee attack. But the thing that they didn't quite realize at the time was one, from reports I found, one, nobody in Kearney could tell the difference at Fort Kearney. And then the other side is that the Pawnee had already aligned themselves with as scouts. With the United States government, and so it was very easily, yeah, picked up on. But the thing about the Plum Creek massacre was this made national news, and indigenous attacks on these wagon trains are very rare. And the fact that it happened kind of, it's like the movie, really bad analogy. I apologize, but think of like the movie Jaws.
Yeah.
Shark attacks are super rare, but everybody now fears getting in the ocean for a shark
Oh yeah.
attack.
Sure.
That just caused ripples across the people migrating west. But the
Yeah.
United States needed people out west to claim that territory. And so
Yeah.
now you have a stop or slowing down of people moving westward. And so I think Abraham Lincoln, yeah, Abraham Lincoln was president at the time. And
Well,
so he signed act to build a fort um, where the Plum Creek site, so where the massacre site is. He built Fort Plum Creek. And this was more of just a show of force, rather in a show that, the United States government is protecting you as you move out west. But it really wasn't anything more than that. They didn't really have provisions for sale or to get these people. The walls of this were and the buildings were all constructed out of sod.
yeah.
So it wasn't like Fort Kearney looked like just a absolute, beacon of, strength and power and all that, where the sod house looked pretty meek and meager from
Yeah.
what we've found. And again, it was just there just to try and reassure people. And so the massacre and this fort happened 2 years before the breakout of the Civil War.
Oh well.
And so as soon as the Civil War started, it happened, this fort was pretty well abandoned as the priority shifted.
Yeah.
And it was only an auxiliary from Fort Kearney. So it really wasn't a well-manned or really a big fort or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's a unique piece of, Phelps County history. So.
Yeah. I guess. All right. Let's take a look at. You go here. Bone Creek Museum of Agrarian Art.
Yeah, Bone Creek Museum is a really well done art museum. They focus on, like I said, agrarian art. So these are artists that lived in the area, but also it's art that focuses on agricultural products, pictures of the Midwest,
Huh.
landscapes, as well as I think landscapes, photos, just talking about how agronomy has changed or shifted, and specifically how these artists and people relate um, to the area,
Yeah.
to the art themselves. And so they're over in David City, Nebraska. And they've been a very faithful member to the Nebraska Museum Association for decades. And they have a pretty constant flow of art galleries, of exhibitions. And they have, I think their next one, is Impact of Nebraska Pollinators.
Okay.
So, focusing on the flora and fauna and how the different artists kind of captured it. And
Yeah.
so they've got a really cool catalog that they always have going in and out. And I would recommend, yeah, giving it a stop. They're very accessible, very I would say it's art that the whole family would really enjoy.
Yeah.
They do have a permanent exhibit and collection focusing on I'm reading through here too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Beth Van Hosen. Um, Fortune, which is a American artist of Robert Gueth Guethme. Sorry,
Oh, sure.
Peter Helk, and then they've got other collections by Luigi Lusoni, Edward Gallon, and Dale Nicholas.
Yeah. I think it's really cool, and let me share my screen with you. I think it's really cool that they have artist workshops. So I guess the artists come there and talk about their art.
Yeah, I think a lot of these workshops are hands-on
Yeah,
workshops. I've never been to one, so
sure.
over at the Bone Creek place, please apologize in advance if I'm butchering any of this. But I as far as the different artist workshops I've been to, it's like hands-on, showing the artist techniques and kind of illustrating the different ways to go about creating art, which is I think it's really great. They've won a bunch of awards for different arts that different galleries and stuff like that that they've put on.
Yeah.
And so I definitely would say that's worth a stop.
Yeah. I like the amount of there's a page called Education, and we have a
Mhm.
lot of stuff happening here. So Bone Creek Art Library and Archives, art and writing contests for students, school and group tours, panel discussions, artist workshops, what we just said, and artist talks and receptions. That's great to have such a, extensive education component of this museum. I think that's really nice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean it's I think education needs to go coinciding with art because a lot of the
Yeah.
times the way that people can relate to the art is one thing, but it's also how can you express, how can you express what, you're seeing or feeling? And I think that art is being that extension. And some people have a very artist soul within them. They might just need the better tools and that can navigate it. So, like I said, they've got a really great art gallery. Definitely worth a stop. If you're ever up in the area of David City.
Let's take a look at the next one. And this is the Cass County Historical Society Museum.
Yes, this is another what I would say is a very typical Midwest museum.
Yeah.
It's like I was saying, it's a Cass County Historical Society. They focus on the inner region, the history of Cass County, and they are another group that has a lot of fun exhibits as well as just they've got a bunch of grounds like they have a lot of different buildings that are in the area that you can go through and learn and kind of immerse yourself.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at the exhibits photos page, and it does look like there's many different buildings, like you just said, a lot of different buildings to look at. So it's not just one museum
Mhm.
building. It's interesting.
Yeah, and they are they're over in Plattsmouth, Nebraska, or Plattsmouth or Plattsmouth, or people over in that way. Correct me, hunt me down and let me know how to pronounce it. Plattsmouth. That's gonna be my best. That's gonna be my best guess.
Okay.
But they have an area newsletter. I recommend checking that out. They have these on. They're all on PDF, and they kind of just they. It's pretty well put together. They kind of talk just briefly on what the beginning or what's going on in the county, what's going on with their museum,
Yeah.
um,
Let's take
and
let's take a look at one because I scrolled down this just now, you can tell they've been doing this pretty religiously for quite a while.
Hmm. And it's pretty it's pretty condensed. The museum that I'm at, we also have a newsletter, and the newsletter is only in print. But this one, they just kind of I think it's cute. They just kind of talk about what's going on with like the president of the organization,
Yeah.
and then they just kind of do a plug on the events that they have, different exhibiting, different programs and stuff like that they have throughout the summer season. And the fact they have that on their website, it's a good way to check out and see what their current exhibits are, what their current programming is, and then also how to help them out.
Yeah, seems like a great way to get the word out about what's going on. Like it.
Yeah, ours is only in print. We're redoing our website completely. Hopefully, in the next coming weeks,
So wait,
we've
so
got a
you
new website
so
designer for our museum.
at your museum you physically mail out?
Yes, we have a
Wow.
physical newsletter still.
Wow.
And it's a lot of history articles. So, like the orphan train article
Yeah.
that you found, that's one from our newsletter that we call the Stereoscope. And so that's pretty common with a lot of these museums as well. So, if you are out visiting, you might ask and say, "Hey, do you have a newsletter?
Yeah.
Can you add me to your mailing list?" And a lot of the times they add in, of course, updates for the museum, but a lot of the times too, they'll have cool history articles. Some of these places, like, they've got some really cool local historians. And so you can find out some really cool events and stuff like that, but you can also find out just history. If you're ever into any of these places, I'm sure most of them still have a newsletter in one way, or either an email newsletter or a physical one.
Your museum website says it's inclusive. But what happens if a guest doesn't speak English? The 42 Kites premium devices translates your exhibit text into over 100 different languages. Even Zulu. Only at 42kites.com.
Let's take a look at the next one. This is Boys Town.
Yeah, this
Boys
one is
Town.
another. Yeah, this is another really unique one. They're actually they have a museum, but they're actually still a current running facility. So Father Flanagan is one of the very important Nebraskans for people to know. He is the founder of Boys Town.
Oh,
And it is I think it's a Catholic. Oh, that one will really get me in trouble if I get that one wrong. I think he is a Catholic father that worked to bring kind of at-risk youths and give them the support system. So it is a full, they have dormitories, they have schools,
yeah.
and they have a full program, and it's still active today. As far as a organization. So they've got they've had a long history with it, and um, they have a really, really cool museum that's really well done that is attached to the facility. So,
Yeah, and I see
uh,
there's even a hospital, I think. It says Boys Town Hospital at the top.
yes,
Wow. Oh, yeah, it says
let
when
me,
Father Edwin Flanagan purchased the Overlook Farm in 1921, it became the new permanent site of the Boys Town.
yeah,
So yeah,
I think it's their main, what they're calling a visitor center or Hall of History. There it is.
where can I
Um,
find that?
so that is going to be under Visitor Center or under Attractions Visitor Center, Hall of History.
Mm,
I don't know if I can share my screen. Does that work at all?
it says, oh, yes, I can see your screen now.
Okay.
Okay. All
Cool.
right. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
sure how
so
to do it.
this is their Hall of History. And it's a really cool. They've got a whole history of both Boys Town, but it's also just a lot of really cool, unique artifacts. I love their exhibit layout. And so it's a really cool piece. And they also have gardens, and just their grounds are really good. Chambers of the Protestants. So I think they're I think I'm going to get in trouble by calling them Catholic.
I'll
I
edit
think
that
they're
out. We'll
Protestant.
keep that. Yeah,
I need
the
to,
architecture of that church was really cool. Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that one. That's awesome.
yeah. It's a really cool exhibit, and this is in Omaha, Nebraska. I kind of forgot to mention. So yeah, this is a Boys Town. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. It's within the cities of Omaha, but Boys Town is its own. Its own, I think, city or town. I
Oh,
think it's
wow.
its own municipality. If I again, that's the thing. Um, if I need to get corrected on, I'm happy to admit I'm wrong at.
No, and it's
But
impressive, and it was all started by this one gentleman.
yes, Father Flanagan. I think I've got that one correct. And his bust, and that a side tangent of this too is our Nebraska State Capitol building is definitely worth a stop. It's not a museum. It's a really cool kind of example of Art Deco b building design, which Art Deco is my personal favorite.
Yeah,
It's that kind of 1920s, you think Great Gatsby style. So it's got and the out that's on the exterior. Inside, it's got just a absolutely breathtaking mosaics all over the floors, and they have busts all along the Capitol building of different important figures within Nebraska's history. The very most recent one is Malcolm X, just got added to those busts. So Father Flanagan is on there, and a whole bunch of others, and then they also have an elevator which is a 1920s super sketchy elevator. I always like do a prayer before going into it because I'm
yeah,
like, oh, this thing's gonna kill me. But
yeah.
no, they've never had issues, so you're fine. But it goes all the way up to the very top where they have a I think they have a memorial up there as well, and a gallery. But you can step outside and you get a whole 360-degree view, 20 stories or something like that up above Lincoln, Nebraska. So it's a
So
really
I'd
cool
imagine
view.
you can see pretty far if everything is
Oh
so
yeah,
close. Yeah,
yeah. And so I highly recommend visiting our Capitol building, just as a side tangent.
sure.
Um, And so yeah, I definitely recommend a visit to Boys Town. I think they've their hours there on their website for the Hall of History. And it's a really cool, unique piece of Nebraska history.
Let's see what's next. Here we go. So up next is Jocelyn Castle and Gardens. There's a castle in Nebraska, apparently.
Yes, and this one also has a very kind of a unique history story to it.
Oh,
It's kind of a well-to-do family that decided to build a castle out of Nebraska. I think this is Nebraska limestone, or if I'm remembering correctly. It's been a minute since I've been over there.
sure.
But they do private tours. So if that's something that you have a group that's wanting to come and visit, they do private tours, but they also have public tours. And so the Joslins themselves were very kind of what you would think of is the 1890s aristocratic kind of stuffy, millionaires. And they were in very, very, very influential in starting up another very well-known art museum in Nebraska called the Joslin Art Museum.
Okay.
Definitely. So the Joslin Castle and the Joslin Art Museum are kind of tied together with the Joslins themselves. And it is made out it like the building itself is phenomenal. They're just finishing up with a new renovation at the Joslin Art Museum that's in Omaha.
Yeah.
And it's got rose quartz as like the main building material. It's just a phenomenal looking building, and they've got some really cool art. But yes, so Joslin Castle is a unique piece of architecture. It's also in Omaha, Nebraska, and it's a 35 room Scottish baronial mansion
Wow.
on a hill kind of on the outskirts, what used to be the outskirts of Omaha.
Yeah, just take a look at the banner on the homepage. It's a really beautiful shot. Look at this. It's like at sunset, this the sky
hmm
is illuminating. That doesn't look like something that would be in the United States.
Yeah.
Really nice.
And I knew that it's a very popular wedding venue. So if
Yeah,
you
I see
are
that.
having
It says
a wedding
weddings and rentals.
and the architect of it, was Sir Walter Scott, a
Oh,
Scottish medieval kind of revival of 19th century Gothic architecture. Was the main designer and fabricator for this. And another museum site that I don't want to spend too much time on, but is a kind of somewhat similar story over in Kearney, Nebraska, over on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Kearney. Um, there's the Frank House is what it's called, and the Franks were again a very kind of late 1800s aristocratian family that built a whole bunch of major infrastructure and factories and stuff like that in Kearney, and so they built this big opulent manor. Kind of a very similar story, and why did these people do that? It wasn't really just for themselves. It was for them to kind of project their wealth, project their power to get business parties involved. Like, oh wow, they are doing really well. I need to partner with these people to build,
yeah.
build things out. And so it was very much so a, flex of their wealth and flex of their stability. And so that's why a lot of the times these big old, mansions built of this era, why they're the way they are. And they've got a really gorgeous garden that goes throughout the campus, especially this time, late spring, early summer. It is very, very gorgeous to walk around in.
Yeah, the photographs look beautiful. And I also noticed there's a lot of special events. And one of them on there sounds awesome. It's Magic, a murder mystery show. That sounds great.
That sounds like something that I'd love to go to.
Yeah.
I love murder mysteries.
Yeah.
That'd be really fun.
Yeah. Seems like a great place. Really beautiful. Yeah. Unexpected to see something like that.
Yeah, I saw on there too. They had a steampunk aesthetic. They had a steampunk tea party. That's very unique.
Yeah.
They've got a historic mansion traveling dinner party. They've got comedy at the castle. It looks just like an active place that always has something going on, which
Yeah.
is cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. Yeah, so here is the calendar, and this is just in June. I mean, there's things every other day, multiple events on some days. Like this day, like the thing is a Friday, three events. So they are busy with
Yeah.
events, getting people involved. I think that's so smart. All right, let's take a look at the next one, which is the Nebraska City Museum Association that you said.
Yeah, so if you click on the tabs that says museums there,
Yeah,
you can go through the whole list. I mean, this is a town that really loves history. And having been there before, they've got a lot of cool museums.
yeah,
Um, and one of their very big community events is their Arbor Day festival and their Applejack festival. And this is they have Arbor Lodge area is just this sprawling orchard that every year they have a big apple festival. That's
yeah.
worth going to. They've got it's a lot of they make apple wines, which
Oh,
is really kind of cool. And they
yeah,
have all of this on a historic site of these different buildings from the an orchard and tree industry. Because Arbor Day, like the tree planting, that started in Nebraska City.
oh wow.
So that's another. We have Kool-Aid and we've got Arbor Day, two things, for Nebraska. But
Yeah.
the Kregel windmill, they have a windmill factory that's been restored and made into a museum. Mayhew and John Brown's Cave is a really cool history attached to the Underground Railroad. It's right kind of on that Nebraska border, and the Mayhew cabin was a quite literally an Underground Railroad piece. It
Oh,
has a log cabin on the top, and they had a subterranean kind of a path that would see runaway slaves as well as just people escaping the South. And trying to find a new life up north. And
yeah.
so a very cool piece of history. And then they have the Lewis and Clark Visitor Center. Lewis and Clark famously made their tour
Yeah.
through there going out west. They've got a museum of firefighting as well as a museum on Civil War. They've got the Taylor Wessel Brickell Nelson House, which is an 1857 brick home, historic building site. They've got the Old Freighters Museum. They've got the Otoe County Museum of Memories, and
Hmm.
they've got the Wildwood Historic Center. So those are all museums that are located in Nebraska City. So
Oh,
they've got a lot on their hands, and of course, they just are, like I said, you can really tell when a community lives in their history. They are
yeah.
active in it and they appreciate it. Their downtown has a lot of really cool shops in it, and what I love is they've restored a lot of the old school painted on advertisements. So like Morton
Oh,
Salt Company advertisement like it was in the 1890s, or a
yeah.
Coca-Cola advertisement like painted on the side of a brick building. And so it's a really cool community, and I definitely recommend a visit. And so that's kind of the museums going west to east. I know I'm forgetting ones. Another notable one is in Kearney, the Mona Museum of Nebraska Art, and they're currently closed, but they're going under this huge renovation, absolutely massive renovation. But they're another museum I thought I'd mention, as well as, I mean, there's just countless number of them. And a great way to get a list of them is to go to the Nebraska Museum Association website. There you can find Nebraska museums, and it'll give you a whole list broken down by region. And another great one is going to the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation website. There you can get into their program called Wander Nebraska. Wander Nebraska, you can find these at most of the museums. It's a booklet, and it lists by region all of the different museums that are in that area. And so there's a lot of really good ways that you can get attached and make up a roadmap throughout the state of all of the cool different museums.
Yeah. So talking about Wander, Nebraska, right here on the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation website, we have this little map here. And I just noticed that when you click on one of them, like let's click on Prairie Playground, it actually opens up to an interactive map. And we can see all these. And you can click on
Yeah,
them. That's great.
yeah, yeah, and it's I think it's partnered through Google Maps, and so
Yeah.
it's a really cool little connection. It makes it pretty easy. Like I said, if you're planning like day trips, or like let's say, yeah, you live in the state of Nebraska, you live in Grand Island, you can get that map and you can just make a day trip, go into all these
Yeah.
different museums. Or if you're traveling through, it gives you a kind of a bird's eye view of like, okay, this is the highway we're going on. We got a couple hours to kill in these different spots, and you can kind of prioritize where you would like to go.
Yeah. Very cool. Let's just rewind to the Nebraska City Museum Association a second here. Let me share my
Hmm.
screen. What I think was really interesting is, and I don't know if it's the exact same street, but like this old school photograph here,
Hmm.
and then I'm assuming somewhere close. And then as you mentioned down here on the bottom right, is it looks like these painted on advertisements.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just kind of restored some of the old school different ones. I in the town that I live at in Holdridge, we are starting the process of restoring some of these murals as well. It just adds so much character to a downtown and make it feel lived in, and also connecting it with the history. So,
Yeah,
like I said, they that's a community that really really loves their history, and it shows.
I guess, yeah. I really think I find this picture really interesting, this old school. It's amazing how wide the street is, and
Hmm.
just I'm assuming no cars at this point because I'm just seeing horses. But you have a
Yeah.
big wide street for some horses. You don't see power lines.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
The
I
biggest
love
building looks
I
like maybe 2 or 3 stories tall. Yeah.
Yeah, and then to the left there in that photograph, that's their county hall. That's their county
Oh, over
courthouse
here.
there on the left. That's why it's got that grassy kind of build up there. And
Yeah,
and
yeah,
this is where, people say Nebraska is flat. Nebraska City is not flat. They have a lot of hills
they do.
throughout, yes. And so yeah, that one would be almost a day trip to go through and see all of the museums in their community.
Yeah, it seems like a lot. Yeah. But yeah, that picture, I look at that and I go, wow, things must have been on some level, things must have been so much easier and simpler. But there are other things that were probably so much harder. But it's
Yeah.
interesting to look at that. Yeah, that's really
Yeah. I always tell people it's like, oh, if you have a time machine, where would you go to? And I said, well, at any point after they had invented generalized anesthetics, because getting a tooth pulled or getting, any sort of their surgery really didn't exist, at least the way that we would want it to. So I like to live in our modern
Yeah.
conveniences as much as possible because, if you've ever had a tooth pulled or ever had a toothache, my wife is a dental assistant. She can tell you, yeah, you want to use the localized anesthetics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to imagine a life without the internet,
Yeah,
without vehicles. I mean, it's
yeah,
crazy. Yeah, but we all survived somehow.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I find like the museums are really cool to kind of connect with the past a little bit. These were people just like, they everyday people living their everyday lives. They had, these are people that had kids that they grew up with. These are people that went to school if, when they had school. These are people that, had recreation that they like to do. They had some things and I find that it is history and the arts are really two things that connect the human experience in a very unique way. And that's something that I really love about museums specifically because they get to kind of put together a snapshot. So it's not just a garbled, kind of takes together a collage in a way. Instead of it being more abstract, you can put things together to really kind of illustrate what life was like.
Yeah. Is that what brought you to work in this industry?
Yeah. So I graduated Nebraska Wesleyan with a undergraduate in history and modern language. And then I have masters, finishing up my masters at University of Nebraska at Kearney in public history. Shout out to those guys. Public history is kind of unique. It's a newer, it's a newish, kind of, degree in that, people think of museum studies. That really focuses on, like I was saying, like curation and and on the museum side, public history really likes to connect where the average person is
Yeah.
and how they relate to history. How is your community identity formed through historic interpretation and stuff like that? So it's a really cool field. It's definitely where my niche is. I like
Yeah.
to kind of find out like, okay, you know, what people choose to latch onto, and it's so.
Yeah.
And I always say we're in a people business. We're really
Sure.
focusing on, how do guests relate to exhibits? How do guests relate to the history? Because it's, I'll get somebody coming in. Like today, I just had a guy come in. He's like, I'm making up a license plate collection. Do you have a license plate collection? I'm like, yeah, actually. We had last year, Don Urabi, what I think was his last name. He donated his 1976 centennial collection of license plates. So he
Wow.
had one license plate for all of the 98 counties in Nebraska.
Wow.
So we had them all, and he was
Yeah.
really happy. He's like, "Oh, I figured out which ones I'm missing." So
Wow.
everybody, I always think, we have something for everybody. It's everybody's niche hobbies and stuff like that that they just kind of find a connection to, and I think that's just a very human expression
Yeah.
that I kind of find really fun. That's, I guess, what I really appreciate with the industry, and that's why all the museums that I've, talked about, history means something different to them
Yeah.
and how they share it and what they share it about is all unique. They all might have a similar root or they might all have a similar connection to like a historical society or a Midwest or their county, but it's all unique to them. It's all, a unique story that has never been told, that is only told there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. That makes museums very special. And what you showed me today, a lot of interesting things. So
Yeah, and I definitely recommend just if you're traveling through the state, there's a lot more to see outside of
sure.
cornfields. I know
Yeah.
that's kind of the misconception, is that there's really nothing out there, but there's a lot of there's a lot of things to do. You know, if you're into breweries and wineries, if you're into distilleries, like if you're on that side of the circuit, if you're into crafts, if you're into quilts, quilts are really big. We have the National Quilt Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska. I forgot to shout them out.
Huh.
That is a very impressive museum on just quilts. And so if you're really into quilts, that's the place to go to. And that's in Lincoln, Nebraska. We've got a lot of unique things that were invented. I didn't even mention Pioneer Village is a really well-known museum. It's in Minden, Nebraska, and that was created by Harold Warp and founded by Harold Warp, and he is the inventor of, I think, cellophane. Like
I don't know what that is.
cellophane, like plastic wrap.
Oh,
Like
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
cellophane. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So, in the plastics industry is where
Yeah.
he got a lot of patents in and stuff like that. And he just collected stuff. And he's like, hey, I want to create a museum in my hometown. And so he just built this huge museum complex and had a lot of really unique historical artifacts in there. And so that's definitely worth a stop as well.
Yeah.
That's in our neck of the woods. And so, yeah, about every community probably. In a research I did, there's 96 out of the 98 counties have a museum
Wow.
in Nebraska.
Yeah. Yeah. I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So is there anything
Yeah.
else we should talk about while we're connected here? Any other museums you want to visit? I'm sure there's tons, but
Yeah. Um, if if any of the if of course if I failed to mention any of these museums, it's not personal. If there's any museums I failed to mention, of course the Wander Nebraska is a great program to find out more at, and of course the Nebraska Museum Association website lists out all of the different museums. And if you would like to, that's a great place to reach out for questions. So if you're a museum professional, if you're an emerging museum professional, reach out to us on our website. That's a great way to get connected with some of the museums I've talked with about, as well as get connected with some of the other really cool people that are in our community. Another museum, we're probably going to go on for hours here of, oh, and another museum, oh, and
yeah,
another
yeah.
museum.
Sure.
So, another one is the Stour Museum located in Grand Island, Nebraska.
Really? Okay.
And they've got a massive footprint. So their museum, I think, is on a couple acres
Hmm.
of land, and so they have live bison on their property. They have a really cool architectural building that houses some of their main exhibits. And then, of course, they're really well known from their old town. So they have a whole bunch of historic buildings, an active woodworking like shop that's ran by Belts and Hit and Miss Motors, and they've got living history. So these are docents or curators that are trained, and they go in period costume to do some
Yeah,
of the
yeah, yeah.
historical interpretation, walking around, answering questions, interacting with guests, and that's a very good museum to visit as well. Um,
Sounds fun.